Hey there everyone, and welcome to some more RPG horror stories with DnD Doge. In today's episode, we have a tale about a dungeon master that decides that he needs to teach a player a lesson. A story about a player that gives another unsuspecting player a preview of her OnlyFans, and more. But with the preamble out of the way, let's get right into these stories. Dungeon Master kills me off with one-shot spell to prove I don't know how to play properly. By Reddit user, Human DLC. I'm not exactly an experienced D&D player, but I'm very into tactics games. I got a new job and they invited me to a during work D&D group. I've not really cared about D&D, but getting paid to play sounded great. Fast forward a year and a half, and at an hour a week, we are almost to the end of the first dungeon, soon to find the dwarves' stashed treasure. I had earned the nickname of Leroy Jenkins for recklessly charging into rooms. I kept doing this because I didn't, and still don't, understand what is reckless about walking into a room after a listen check, spot check, and trap check into the area by multiple characters with high stats in each. The other players ranged from thinking it was funny to one player messaging me after games, thanking me for moving the game forward. The one person who didn't appreciate this was the Dungeon Master. He told me outside of the game how reckless I was, and that I should let the tanks go first at least. I was confused by this, since until a couple of new players joined as tanks, I had been speccing into a tank druid. I just brushed off his comments since I was tanking well, but he didn't like that. Finally, we got into an intense fight at the bottom of the dungeon against some very powerful drow. Ironically, this fight started by us seeing them from far away, and not from me charging into a room. I rolled high on initiative, and being a melee fighter, moved forward to engage. While I sped forward outside of combat, in combat, I am much more careful and split my movement going forward instead of just charging in with my full movement to get to the group of drow mages. I stopped about 10 feet ahead of my closest party member, still about 30 feet away from the enemies. Though it turned out there was a giant summon hiding behind a wall that got an opportunity attack on me, and several more enemies jumped out as well. This was the DM's way of proving my recklessness. Unfortunately for him, I was really a tank and continued to heal through the damage throughout the battle, despite being the primary target of attacks, even after the other party members stepped out in front of me. Unfortunately for me, the Dungeon Master had an ace up his sleeve. All the enemy mages had a spell unique to 3.5e called Destruction. You get a fortitude save against it. If you pass, you take 10d6 damage. Our party averaged around 100 health each, with me at about 110. If you fail the save, you are destroyed completely, not even ashes left. I was morphed into a troll to buff my fortitude, but even with that, the roll gave me a 20% chance of failing. I passed the save and took the damage the first 3 times it was cast on me, and even healed back to about 80 health, though I did not pass the 4th time. The Dungeon Master private messaged me, telling me that there was a way to resurrect my character if the group paid a large amount of gold and traveled for what would be about 3 or 4 sessions, and that they might do it if I begged them. Then, in-game, told them that they knew that they were very close to finding the treasure as the fight finished. The player that likes when I moved the game forward offered to pay for my resurrection, but no one else seemed to really care that I died. I'm planning on leaving the group, as I don't care enough to go back and hear the Dungeon Master talk about how he taught me a lesson about charging in, while the rest of the group begrudgingly travels for several sessions to bring me back. The problem is that the DM will probably still have it out for me. I had a good laugh about it with my friend who is an avid D&D player, and he told me to post the story here. Oh geez, I feel bad for OP, as this sounded like their first time playing Dungeons & Dragons. With the way that the enemies were primarily going after OP's character and none of the others, even though they were in front of OP, there is absolutely no way that the Dungeon Master wasn't purposely going after OP's character with those spells. I don't blame OP for not wanting to go back to that game. Plus, it sounds like it was just something that they all did during their work break anyways. Though, I hope that this didn't sour OP's opinion of the game, and that they give it another shot. But this time, not at work, and with a dungeon master that won't target them to teach them a lesson. Let's move on. Probably not going to be playing a martial character again for a while. By Reddit user, The Choosy Beggar. Our group had just entered the dungeon's final chamber, and began the long-awaited final battle with the Goblin Chief. My level 5 barbarian wins initiative, and immediately rages and rushes towards the throne, hoping to do some tanking and get my ancestral guardians up and distracting the mob. On the second round of initiative, the gnome sorcerer cast Fireball at the throne, hitting everyone in the vicinity, my character included. Granted, he felt a bit weird about hitting me, but I told him to go for it, as it was the ultimate Fireball opportunity. So he cast it, and did huge damage, dropping a few of the weaker mob members. Unfortunately, my barbarian failed his dex save, and was also dropped by the fire, which he did not resist. One enemy attack and a nat 1 on a death save later, my barbarian was dead. He died on the second round of combat to friendly fire, having not swung his sword once. For the rest of the 3-hour boss fight, I sat there, playing on my phone, listening to the rest of the party consoling the gnome, who felt really guilty about it, saying things like, "You did 300 damage with that attack. The barbarian wasn't going to do that much damage all fight," and "You made the objectively right tactical decision." And that's the part that really stung. I was fine with getting hit by the fire. I told him to go ahead with it after all. I think I was even fine dying immediately. What really upset me was that the entire table unanimously decided that my 5th level barbarian was less useful to a 10+ round fight than one 3rd level spell. Man, that has got to sting a bit, but I would not take it too personally. To me, it sounds like they were just trying to make that player feel better about what happened, but didn't really think about how the comments would be construed by OP. I would just say something to the players in private about it if those comments really affected you that much. But with all things considered, this isn't that bad, and I'm sure that after rolling a new character and rejoining the party and going through a few sessions, it will be a distant memory. Now, before we move on to the next one, I realize that this video is a bit shorter than normal, but that's just kinda how the cards fell today. But that doesn't mean that you're not going to get any kitties.
Hello, it's me, Nipsey. I hope that you like, comment, and subscribe.
Thanks, Nipsey. I hope they do too. Now, let's move on. When the E in ERP gets a little too real. By Reddit user, Fairy Jars. I own an extremely small role-playing server, which allows people to post advertisements for campaigns. My friend was setting up a campaign set in Neverwinter. While this game wasn't explicitly an ERP game, it was open to erotic themes, and everyone joining this game knew this up front, and it would be a play-by-post game. Anyway, he gets his first interested player, and she sends him a fully clothed picture of herself in cosplay that she wants to use for her character's art. Alright, no biggie. He talks to her a little more about the nature of the campaign, and she proceeds to send him a full nude of herself, completely unsolicited, from her OnlyFans page. Now, he was made quite uncomfortable by this, so I chewed her out and banned her from the server. After all, if it had been a man sending unsolicited pictures of himself, people would expect him to be banned immediately. And I can't make an exception for a woman from OnlyFans. She, of course, begs me to unban her after admitting that she did this kind of behavior repeatedly and it's never been a problem before. To which I refuse to revoke my decision and tell her to have a nice evening. Yeah, no. It's never okay for someone, no matter the gender, to send anything of that nature to anyone unless both parties agreed to it. No further elaboration on that matter needs to be said. Good on OP for bringing down the ban hammer on that. Especially with the fact that she stated that she's done it before, like it's a totally normal thing to do. Let's move on. How I finally learned to react to red flags. By Reddit user, Proper Author 9800. Okay, so this one is really short, and only barely qualifies as a horror story, as there was barely any conflict, but I feel it's noticeable enough that it's worth reporting. A short while ago, a Dungeon Master friend of mine asked for volunteers for a not safe for work roleplay game that he wanted to experiment on that would involve Dungeon Punk. Now, while not a huge fan of ERP, I do not mind it occasionally, and the setting sounded fun, so I agreed to join. Within the few minutes of joining the group, a player was discussing how he was going to play as a hypnotist demon with an angelic slave. Now, to be clear, when I said that I don't mind ERP, I meant vanilla ERP. Darker or kinkier stuff tend to make me highly uncomfortable, so I immediately suggested that we should all discuss boundaries before starting. I was asked what mine were, and I immediately gave a typical list of things that I wanted to avoid, which included, among others, essay, slavery, profanation of real-world religious artifacts and symbols, vor, scat, and excessive gore. The Dungeon Master immediately answered that he apparently intended to include all of these, and as such, it was probably for the best if I avoided that one. So I agreed and left the game. I honestly feel no animosity towards either the group or the Dungeon Master. They weren't rude, the Dungeon Master was honest about the warning, and I left before anything went wrong. But I am still amazed that somehow all of the things that I didn't want in the game were planned to be in that one. This is probably the only role-playing game to date that I feel no regret of dropping out of. TLDR, I set up to join an ERP game that turns out to be much more extreme than I expected, and thankfully was allowed to leave peacefully before it even started. Well, that sounds like that was going to be a weird game. And I agree that it's kinda strange that everything that OP stated were hard limits for them were going to be in the game. I mean, to each their own, but my god, I'm not sure I would want to be around anyone from that group. Thankfully, OP realized that might have been more than what they wanted when the one player stated what their character was going to be, and suggested the session 0 in order to find out that they definitely didn't want any part of that. So, happy ending, I guess? But that is all I have for you today. As always, I appreciate all of you, and may your games remain horror story free. Until next time.